Lindsay, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
That's amazing. The other day I met you, and right away I knew you were a very interesting fellow. You had a lot of things to say about your upbringing and stuff like that. So, would you like to share that with us?
Of course, yes.
That'd be great. So, can we start saying about what's your full name?
Well, I'm Lindsay Nielson,
Uh-huh.
and um, well, that's it.
Okay, very good, Lindsay. Can we talk a little bit about your biography, where you were born and
Sure.
how you made it here? What year were you born in?
I was born in 1940 in Manila in the Philippine Islands, and excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. But I was adopted by the Nielson family,
Uh-huh.
Lori Nielson and Annette Nielson, which was probably the most luckiest act that ever happened to me because they were they were fairly influential people in the Philippines prior to the war.
Okay.
My father, Laurie Nielsen, was a British citizen. He was born in New Zealand. My mother was an American who was born in Iowa. I have no idea how they got together, but they were in business in the Philippine Islands prior to the war. And Laurie Nielsen was quite the entrepreneur. He is best known. He built the first civilian airport in Manila, called Nielsen Field. It had the unique advantage. There were two military airfields, Clark, and I can't think of the other one. But this was the only civilian airport, and he was quite an influential person. He was an advisor to the mayor of Manila. He was in mining.
Was he military?
No, he was
A civilian.
just an entrepreneur. He actually, prior to going in the Philippines, he started his career in actually Los Angeles selling those check protector machines that it would perforate a check so you couldn't change the amount.
Oh, okay.
And so he was offered the Hawaii territory in the early 30s. And he figured he couldn't do any worse over Hawaii than he was doing in Los Angeles. So he said, sure. Well, he caught the eye of a gentleman that owned a stockbrokerage firm in Manila and asked him if he'd be interested in coming to the Philippine Islands.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if he knew where they were, but he said, why not? Well, he was a go-getter. And so shortly thereafter, he had his own stock brokerage company. As I said, he got into mining and importing. My mother, Annette Nielsen, was a businesswoman in her own right. She had a business called The Caravan. Now, this was pre-communist China. So people would come in and say, they would design a piece and say, I'd like you to have it built. So she would go to China. She would buy antiquities to put into the pieces of furniture.
Was she like a designer that
designer and
took a piece of furniture and made it much nicer?
oh yes, and then actually General MacArthur and his wife were customers of hers. I mean, they would order something, she'd go to China and have it built, and so she was quite an active person, and they had quite a life. I mean, their home was on Manila Bay on Dewey Boulevard. She had polo ponies, horses. They had, of course, he had an airplane. He built the airport, so they had an exceptionally good life. I mean, with houseboys and cooks and chauffeurs and all that other stuff, which was affordable in those days.
Yeah. Now, did you ever get the chance to know where your birth parents were from, or?
Yes, let me get to that. They were. I actually have my adoption papers.
Oh wow, you got to see them.
I have them signed by the judge. And the only hint I had of who my father was is my adopted mother wrote his name on the back of the papers. I knew he was a medical doctor. Dr. Rudy Moser was his name. But that was
It was handwritten in the back of the document.
yeah, it wasn't part of any of the paperwork. So I knew, and my mother told me that my father was a doctor, and so I think the connection was, since my birth father was a doctor, I found it interesting that the connection between the Nielsens and me as an infant was the head of the medical society in Manila, Dr. Lindsay Fletcher. Ha ha! Yeah, there's where the name came from.
Wow.
So I think that he may have put the Nielsens in the loop, you know.
Right.
And frankly, I think that's probably one of the most miraculous things that ever happened. Here's two hard-charging people, no children. They're probably in their late 40s or early 50s. And somebody says, here, would you like this little year-old? I mean, I can't think of anything that would mess up a beautiful life than having it's like getting a puppy all of a sudden, And so...
well, it's a little bit more than a puppy.
Well, a little more of a commitment, I will say that. But still, knowing the life that they led, and I mean... their idea of a vacation was they'd take the flying clipper ships, the planes that used to be able to land on water around the world. I mean, that was their idea of a vacation. So you talk about God's finger on your shoulder. I mean, because had they not done that, I mean, I was adopted in July 41.
So 1 year after you were born.
Yeah, little more. And everybody knows in December of 41 what happened. But war clouds were on the horizon. Everybody knew that Japan was being pushed, and, they're going to do something. Because they were already in China. They had conquered Manchuria. They had conquered Shanghai. So it was troubling times for everybody. So to think that they would reach out and say, "Yeah, we'll take in this infant," it's an amazing story to me.
Remind us what happened on December 1941.
Of course, we all know that on December 7th, Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Right.
But I used to give a lot of talks to service clubs because, as I said, I'm probably one of the few people still alive that was actually involved in the war personally.
Yeah.
And I would go to a service club and I'd start out December 8th, 1941 is a day of infamy. And I'd see the puzzled look on everybody's,
He's like, he got his dates wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly the look that I'd get. Oh, the old guy's losing it, I said, no. It was December 7th on your side of the international date line. But in Manila, it was December 8th. And the Japanese bombed Manila on the same day they bombed Pearl Harbor.
Was it on their way to Pearl Harbor?
That's a long way to go. So it probably was a different task force. But they wanted to conquer the Philippines. So, shortly after that, in December 41, the Americans living in the Philippines all got a note from the Japanese because they had actually landed troops and conquered Manila. Mm-hmm. And so we were informed that we were to report to the University of Santo Tomas. It's the oldest university in Asia, built in the 1600s by the Jesuits. And it had the advantage, the campus had an advantage of having an 8-foot adobe wall all around the campus. So it was a built-in internment camp.
Did they build it because of the war that was happening at the time?
No. I mean, it was built as I said, in 1600, the Japanese just took it over because it was a good place to herd all the American civilian internees. And so we were given notice that on, I don't know, January 3rd or something, we were all to bring 3 days' worth of clothing and report to Santa Tomas University. Well, that 3 days turned into over 3.5 years. But
wow.
So it, so from going from this wonderful life to being a prisoner of war in a matter of 20 days was, I'm sure, quite a shock to everybody. But the interesting fact was that Laurie Nielson, my adopted father, was British, and my mother was American. So they separated it. Laurie Nielson was sent to Hong Kong. The Japanese had conquered Hong Kong, and he was imprisoned with British prisoners of war. And my mother, being an American, and I were kept in Manila for the American internees. There was 3,800 Americans in Santa Tomas, and like being Americans, they had to organize the prisoners, and so they had committees for everything. They had hygiene committees, food committees. They had an executive committee that interfaced with the Japanese commandant for the camp, education, entertainment committee. I mean, things to, Americans love committees.
Yeah.
And so they organized the camp. And it was, I think the Japanese kind of didn't know what to do with this. So in the very early days of the internment, they said, look, you can bring whatever you want into the camp, because there wasn't enough housing to house everybody. They allowed us to build these little grass shanties. I have some photographs of them in here, but they were just, you're on poles, the floor was above the ground, it wasn't on the ground, and you just had these grass mats for a roof, and so you could, they allowed the prisoners to bring whatever they could get in there, but that stopped shortly afterwards because it was.
So these camps, were they, do you remember how old you were when you were inside these camps?
Yes.
And if you were, how old were you?
Well, I was, let me see, probably, 18 months old when I
This
went
is in Manila, right?
In Manila.
And what's your first memory of living in? Because if you're 18 months old, you really probably have very little recollections of any.
No, but over the 3.5 years that we lived there, I have some recollections. Some of them just burned into my brain.
Do you mind talking about them?
Oh no, later on, I probably was maybe 4 or so. When the Americans were beginning to, it took a while for MacArthur and the American fleet to recapture all the various islands. They went island hopping. You remember that? And so they were trying to soften up the Japanese, and they would bomb Manila occasionally. And I remember we had a bed that they built up on. And it was our bomb shelter. I put that in quotes because we'd get under the bed. A lot of good that would do. But I distinctly remember a piece of shrapnel coming through our grass roof. And as a kid, I ran out and grabbed it and burned the hell out of myself because it was hot, obviously. I didn't realize that. And then in December of 44, there was a huge typhoon in that region.
So you were already 4 years old at that point.
Right. And the it was a huge typhoon, and it it was known because even though we had radar, it was in its infancy, and it wasn't totally trustworthy. So Admiral Halsey had sent 3 destroyers on a mission, and they went right into the typhoon and sunk. Mm-hmm. There's a book out called Halsey's Typhoon. Yeah, Halsey's Typhoon. You know, that was a bad deal. So, but in any event, I bring that up because they had all of the prisoners go into the main education building because it was, I mean, everything was wiped out. The winds and the rains, it was like a hurricane. But we had to get out of the grounds and into a solid structure, like the administration building. And I recall after the typhoon left, I recall coming out and seeing, of course, water everywhere. And, and the devastation of all these little shanties that had been blown over. So that's a recollection.
And do you remember was there chaos in the encampment when that was happening, or was
Well,
everybody pretty much knew what they were getting themselves into
Well,
with this typhoon?
you know, it's like living in Florida. You know you're going to get hit by these things periodically. So I suspect that they were aware of it, but this was a big one. Yeah. But in terms of recalling things, I remember, the Americans had intercepted the Japanese code. They knew what the Japanese were sending each other because we'd broken their code. And one of the, in fact, we'd broken one. We knew that their commanding general was flying to a designation someplace. We intercepted that plane and shot him out of the sky. I mean, but you didn't want to reveal it in a manner in which you let on to the fact that you were reading their message.
You wanted to make it look like, they got lucky.
Yeah.
Or, because otherwise then they would know, hey, they know the code. We need to change it or do
absolutely. So one of the messages they intercepted was an order from Tokyo that if things go bad, kill the prisoners. We would just kill them.
That was you guys.
That was us, yeah.
That's not good.
And that's not good. And for some reason, the Red Cross, who had access to us, told our camp leaders. I said, well, I'm not sure that's a good idea, but because MacArthur was nowhere near returning to the Philippines yet. Uh-huh. And the Red Cross said, well, look, if we think that's happening, we'll drop small arms into the camp for you. Wow. You could have a 45 versus whatever. So
that doesn't sound like a very fair fight.
No, it doesn't. So, but in any event, they told us that. So there was a lot of concern, obviously. We would, you get bits and drabbles and information and whatever the Red Cross could tell us, but until Leyte, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, where we wiped out their navy. I mean, essentially, we wiped out 3 aircraft carriers, Japanese aircraft, a battleship, and a bunch of cruisers in the Battle of Leyte.
Do you remember what year that was?
That would have been in 1944.
Okay.
And but so as things were not good in the camp. I mean, the adults all said, look, they'll go without just as long as the children eat, because there was not much food, and early on your Filipinos could bring food to you, and that stopped. And then food that the Red Cross would bring was stolen by the Japanese, So it was. So
you were getting probably very small rations, and at the same time, the rations were probably already a little bit spoiled. Not very good,
Yeah, I mean, there's I
Do you remember seeing a lot of people getting sick from their stomachs and just having?
Well, I don't recall that, but I have a book that on the liberation of the Pacific about MacArthur, and you see some of these guys that had been 180 pounds down to 90, and
Wow.
pretty grim stuff. And but the going on with that story. My mother used to tell me that. Well, first of all, MacArthur knew of that order. So when they decided to invade Luzon, the main island where Manila is located, they landed about 70 miles north of Manila, and he formed what he called a flying column of tanks and said, go to the Santa Tomas, don't engage the Japanese, just get there. So they had these tanks rumbling down as fast as they could to Manila. And so on February 3rd, 1945, about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, we heard boom. We didn't know what the hell it was. And
yeah, because there was no way of them telling you what was happening.
No, but I will tell you, about 2 or 3 days before that, a little Piper Cub spotter plane flew over the camp, and the pilot threw his goggles out. And there was a message in the goggles, and it just said, better late than never. So we knew what that meant. And then on the other side,
he dropped it in the encampment.
Yeah, just threw his goggles.
You guys heard about it.
We knew about it. There.
Your mom and dad heard about it, and then they told you. And
well, my mother did, right? Mm-hmm. And then on the other side of the goggles, he wrote, "Roll out the barrel." Well, you tell that to an American, they know what the hell you're talking about. Yeah. So, very excited.
It was a good day.
Yeah, liberation's on its way.
Yeah.
But on February 3rd, we didn't know if it was the Japanese coming to annihilate us, because we knew that was true too. But it, of course, was MacArthur's 44th tank people that came in. So, they just
plowed
right through the main gate of Santa Tomas, and so there was panic. My mother said they didn't know if it was the Japanese coming to kill us or what. So
it was a little unnerving, I would imagine. Lindsay, do you remember approximately how many people were in your encampment?
3,800.
3,800. All these people in one place.
Right. Wow. And there's a lot of anecdotes. The latrines were maybe 41 holers outside. And they said, if you want privacy, shut your eyes.
Wow.
Because that's all you're going to get.
Yeah.
But so when the tanks came in on February 3rd, my mother said she was panicked like everybody else. And she was running down one of the streets there at the university. And this tank stops in front of her. And she thought, oh, this is it. This is my last moment on Earth. And she saw the hatch open up. She thought some guy would just shoot her. But instead, she said, some fellow in a deep Southern accent said, "Lady, would you move your goddamn ass? We're trying to fight a goddamn war." And she said, she had many beautiful words spoken to her in her lifetime.
Uh-huh.
Those are the most beautiful words she ever heard in her lifetime. And so
that is funny. It's a welcoming word. Right?
Yeah.
Get your fat ass
out of the way, lady. Yeah. And so anyway, researching this over the years, the Army writes a history of each major engagement. I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they liberated the camp, I learned that the name of the first 2 tanks into the camp, the first one was called the Battling Basic, but the second tank was called the Georgia Peach. I said, aha. She said he had a Southern accent. Georgia Peach. I said, that corroborates that in my mind.
Yeah.
So I'll get to this story later on where it gets really interesting. But so the next, I do remember after MacArthur said, don't the Japanese still controlled Manila, and Santa Tomasa was in the middle of Manila.
So when these tanks came in and just busted through the gates, and then all the people jumped out of the tanks, what happened to the guards? They just disappeared? Or they put up a fight?
That's very interesting. The guards took hostages up to the third floor. The main building was 3 stories.
They just grabbed whoever they could grab.
They had the men up there. And so for about 24 hours, there was continuous negotiations. And much credit goes to the fellow that was head of our organization. I think he worked for General Tire Company before the war, but
wow.
he was our with the American commanders and the Japanese. And so they arranged to allow the Japanese to keep their swords, that's a very big deal, and their sidearms. And they could march out 2 by 2 with American GIs on either side of them.
Okay.
And they marched about, they released the hostages, nobody was killed, and they marched them out of the camp and into the streets of Manila. Well, what the Japanese guards did not know is the Filipino guerrillas were waiting for them, and I don't think they lived much more than an hour after that, because they were waiting for them.
Yeah.
But after, and I have some video of they still had not liberated Manila yet. Yeah. So I have howitzers in the camp shooting into Manila from different sides to get the, and the Japanese were very unhappy with the Filipino population because they knew they favored the Americans. So they took it out on the civilian Filipinos, and they murdered about 100,000 of them in that next 30 days. Bind their hands and behead them or whatever else. And very gruesome. Yeah. And but ultimately, the Japanese were annihilated, and Manila was once called the Pearl of the Pacific. It was a beautiful city, but it was leveled.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were very unhappy with MacArthur, but they don't seem to realize he wasn't given a choice. It's like what's happening today, in Gaza,
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, it is.
War is always ugly, and you lose your humanity, and it's like you become basically animals. Striving for survival. So, speaking of that, Lindsay, do you remember? I know you were only 4 years old when you were in these camps. Do you remember the treatment that the guards would give the people there, or?
Well, they had rules, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
If your path crossed a Japanese guard, you had to bow. And if you didn't bow low enough, they'd let you know.
So you'd have to be submissive.
Oh, yes. You had to bow anytime a Japanese guard came by. I had a teenage brother, since dead. But
he was there in the camp with you?
Yes. And he...
what was his name?
Laurie Nielson.
Was he your... He was.
He was I called him my brother, but we were not biological brothers.
No, but he was
raised by.
Raised also adopted.
Yes.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. And but being a teenager, he was kind of a hellraiser. Well, he violated some rules, and so the Japanese had a very unique way of trying to teach him a lesson. He had to stand for. He had to stand for 6 or 8 hours. He had to sit for 6 or 8 hours, and then he had to lie down for 6 or 8 hours, which isn't bad. But it was a long day. I'm sure he wasn't fed, and I tried to teach him a lesson. Yeah. But they had many rules. we had some interesting things. Towards the end of the war, food was very scarce, and the Japanese were going to kill the carabao, water buffalo.
Yeah.
And they, after they took the parts they want, they said, okay, you can have the rest. Well, my mom got 2 of the hoofs of the poor thing, and she boiled them and made a broth. Oh my God! But
when you're hungry,
Yeah,
it's freaking good.
But there used to be a fella here in Ventura. He was in the camp also, and he and I'd have lunch every nowadays. And I told him that story, and he says, "Oh my God, we got some other part of that poor beast."
Yeah,
his family. I said, I forget what his name is now, but
is he here in California?
No, well, he lived in Ventura.
Oh,
but he's since deceased. But I can't recall his name. I'm sorry, but I said we ought to try and put that poor beast together, find out and see if we could put the poor animal back together again. But one time, she got. In another one of these episodes, she got a bucket of blood, the animal's blood, and my mother steamed it over a rock, whatever. And you think, oh my God, how could you? She made a pudding, blood pudding,
yeah, blood pudding.
And you think, oh, but it's pure protein. You probably couldn't have had a better part of the animal.
Yeah, they threw away the best part.
I know, and so she had this blood pudding that she made, and was able to feed a lot of people.
Yeah.
But you're talking about recollections after they finally subdued Manila. They wanted to get us out of the war zone because the war is still going on.
So let's go back to where you're in the encampment, and then they break in and they make this deal to let everybody out. How did they get you out of the camp? Did they put you in a plane or?
I'm getting to that because
before we do that, Lindsay, I'm gonna get something to drink. Would you like some water, some Gatorade, something?
Oh, a little water would be great.
Little water. You like it cold or you like it room temperature?
Either way.
I have it both ways. How do you want it?
Oh, how about cold?
Cold? Okay, very good.
Okay.
So you can keep talking if you want.
Okay.
So we'll get back to that story.
Do you want something to drink on?
You want cold water?
No, I'm good.
No, you're good. Go help yourself, okay?
Oh, thank you.
Well,
Here you go, Lindsay.
thank you.
Yeah. Cheers.
All right. Yeah. So after Manila was subdued, they wanted to get the prisoners out of the war zone because the war would go on for, from February to August, and so they decided to ship us out, and they commandeered a merchant ship, USS Mormac Sea. I mean, there's several of them, but the one I happen to be on. They put a couple of guns on it and sent us to San Francisco. Took over 2 weeks to do that. But I remember 3 things about that. As a youngster, we went out of those landing crafts out in Manila Bay to get to the boat. It's parked out in Manila Bay. And so as a kid, I'm sitting on the side of that thing and it's bobbing up and down in the bay. It must have been so exciting and thrilling because I still remember that little journey out to the boat.
Imagine for a 4-year-old.
That's great.
It's like a playground.
Yeah, so, but then in the over 2 to 3 weeks it took to get from Manila to San Francisco, we were followed by a submarine for 3 days. And they didn't know whether it was an American submarine or a Japanese submarine. So as a result, all all 3,800 weren't on this ship. They had several ships that they brought people over to. But those of us on that ship had to sleep on deck in our little Mae West life preservers for 3 days until they discovered it was an American submarine. Thank goodness. Wow. So, but Alex, the most vivid memory. I mean, it is as if it happened last week. Was coming under the Golden Gate Bridge. It still makes a visceral effect on me because I can still see the superstructure of the bridge as we came under. You could only imagine the emotion that was unloosed at that time. Yeah. And it's still, one of my kids went to Berkeley College. And every time we go visit him, I said, look, I don't need to take the Bay Cruise. I saw it in 1945. Yeah. But it was, that's an indelible impression.
That seems to really touch your heart when you even think about it. So I can imagine the emotion you felt when you actually saw it.
Well, I was a youngster, but it seems to get deeper as the older I get.
That's amazing.
It, it was... Well, the grace of God that I was young and didn't see what the adults saw.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't pretty. There were lots of deaths in the camp.
But if you think about it, Lindsay, if to somebody that lives a normal life like us right now, we go to work, right. We do our chores and everything, being thrown into an internment camp after that could be totally devastating. But to you, luckily, I mean, it's right. Terrible that it happened to you, but to you, luckily, that's your only world you knew.
Right.
So you didn't know to gauge it from compared to what.
Right.
So I can imagine when you saw this beautiful structure, the bridge, and it probably was overwhelming for you. Well, even at a young age of 4.5, 5 years old.
Right. Well, I could just only imagine the emotion of all the adults too, because they lived through this, period of time. So it was, I used to say, look, some people end up in prison. I just started out that way and got it over with early.
So you've done your time.
Yeah, I've already done my time.
That's good for you. Okay, so you're 4.5 years old, out of the internment camp into the United States of America. And what happens next? Where do you land?
Well,
where do you go?
Of course, my adopted mom had family in San Francisco, so I stayed with them. She stayed back in Manila.
Now, Lindsay, at this point, are you a United States citizen or are you a Philippine citizen?
No, I had to be naturalized. I actually, my father was British, my adopted father. My mother was American.
But they were living in the Philippines.
They were living in the Philippines, which was a protectorate of the United States, but it wasn't an independent country. Long and short of it was I was not shown as an American citizen. Mm-hmm. I guess I must have been British or something because my father's. But I had to become a naturalized citizen. So although all of my education from first grade to law school, I've been here in the United States.
Yeah.
So
same with me. I was born in Mexico, but I was naturalized at 6 years old.
Well, I was naturalized when I was in college. I thought.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I mean.
So when they brought you over after the encampment, you were in kind of like in.
Well, I was in I learned. I was in high school. I lived in San Francisco. My mother stayed back to see what she could salvage. Not much. We moved to Palo Alto, and then ultimately moved to Palm Springs. She felt that the climate was very close to the Philippines. It seems to me it's not tropical, but she felt the heat was. So I grew up in Palm Springs, and I remember in high school we had to drive to San Bernardino to the immigration department, and I remember this poor immigration officer telling my mother that, well, Lindsay came in on a visitor's visa, and he's going to have to leave the country and come back in again.
Yeah.
And I've never seen my mother enraged like that. She says, "You're telling me you're going to deport my son?
Wow.
Like hell you are." So she got hold of her congressman, and that didn't happen. But they, and as a result of our congressman there in Riverside County.
Do you remember his name?
Dalip, he was an Indian from India. Dalip Singh, he was our representative.
Wow.
And they have in Congress, they have special laws, they call it. All these things that can clean up all this crap that happens. So one of the special laws was to allow me to remain in the country. I mean, it's amazing.
I think some of the Congress people have that power to,
right.
kind of give amnesty to certain people depending on their situation.
Well,
so that was good that your mom was.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm glad that your mom was strong enough to say, "Hey, this is an injustice, and we're going to make sure this doesn't happen."
Boy, I mean,
I
was scared.
Most people would just fold and say, "Okay."
I was scared though. I thought, "Gee, this guy can't take me out of the country."
Right.
And she says, "You're not going to take him." So, but in any event, my wife and I go to these periodic reunions of people in the camp. It's all the children now. All the adults are all dead now.
Yeah.
But in one of these reunions, one of the people said the American government sent a bill to all of us for the passage from Manila to San Francisco, and it wasn't a third class; it was a first class passage, a bill.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought, how enraged is that? How could? Well, the Red Cross resolved that for us, but to send us a bill, I mean, you're fighting a war, for crying out loud.
And they wanted you to pay for it?
And they want us to pay for our passage back home after they liberate us. So I thought, so there's something wrong here. But
well, our government is not perfect.
Well,
Lindsay.
Far from it. But the
did your parents pay for it?
No, the Red Cross picked it up.
Okay, good.
But I mean, I suspect that probably panicked a lot of people to say, "Oh my God, we're only going to get $500 or whatever it was in those days."
Yeah.
So I've often wondered, if the war. Well, first of all, if I hadn't been adopted, I probably would not have survived the war. I would have been in an orphanage, and that would have been curtains. Had I not been adopted by the Nielson family, my mother, who was, I thought, a very interesting woman, she had 3 lives, I always said. Her first life, she was married to very poor, married to some fellow, they had 5 children. He died. And so how she got from Chicago to L.A., I don't know. But anyway, she did. Her second life was in the Philippines in the mid-30s to 45.
That's where you came in.
Yeah. But she had a life I could only imagine. I mean, a very privileged life because both of them were entrepreneurs. It was right place, right time.
Yeah.
And then after her third life is when we got back to the States. Essentially, she devoted her life to me to make sure that
you had a career.
I'm gonna. Yeah, she used to say, "You're gonna make something of yourself, or you're gonna tell me why."
That's good. So, now, Lindsay, did you notice that this time in the encampment, which was approximately, according to my math, about 3.5 years?
Yes.
Did you notice that it broke your parents in any way, or did it make them stronger?
Well, my father, as I said, was in Hong Kong, and he didn't survive the war. So, but I suspect the experience with my mother, Annette. She was a very strong-willed woman. And so I suspect that it probably steeled her, it made her stronger. The more I hear of other stories, people that I associate were all children there. And in fact, there's she's an artist up in Ohio. She was in the camp, and so I stay in touch with her.
Was she a child also?
Oh yeah, a little older than I was, but so we all have different experiences, but it molded us. It had to mold you, So.
Talk about life-changing events.
Oh well, as I said, I would pay anything to have been a fly on the wall to hear the discussion between my adoptive parents discussing whether or not to adopt an infant with war clouds on. I mean, I can only imagine him saying, like hell, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I don't think you know the circumstances from your biological parents as to why they gave you up for adoption.
Well, I've learned since, but
I'd love to hear it if you want to share it. Sure. But also the other part of it, your adoptive parents being able to take this young 1-year-old and take them into their custody and just go with them all the way to the end. So that's two amazing stories.
Well, my mother used to say that Lori Nielson obviously was a go-getter. He was an entrepreneur. He got things done.
Yeah.
And she said that prior to the war, she implored him to take $250,000 and put it in Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And she said his answer was, "Oh, nothing's going to happen. What are you telling about?"
Insurance.
Yeah, well, he just said, "No, nothing's going to happen." Yeah, so that didn't pan out too well. But they had, as I said, after the war, my mother stayed there to see what she could put together. And of course, our home had been a direct hit with a bomb on Manila Bay. They had an 80-foot long yacht that the Japanese took all the equipment off, metal, and then sunk it. Well, a diver went down. She hired a diver, and there's a beetle in the tropics that it bores in and it just hollows out everything it's in. He said he took his little hammer and hit the mast, and the whole thing just it just came down. And so they, after the liberation of the Philippines, we didn't have an Air Force. It was the Army Air Corps, it was called in those days. Well, Nielson Field became the headquarters for the Far East Army Air Corps. Mm-hmm. Our little civilian field.
Was that the one that your
father built?
Your father built?
Yeah, Nielson Airport, and
wow.
And the Philippine Airlines started there. Its first flight was from Manila to Baguio. It's a little mountain resort. And in 1996, I got a letter from Philippine Airlines inviting me to San Francisco to attend the 50th anniversary of their first trans-Pacific flight from Manila to Oakland. Uh-huh. Took 40 hours. Island hopping. You went from, Midway to.
Well, you had to stop to go to the restroom.
Well, they made about 5 island puddle jumps, then forced from Hawaii to Oakland.
They got to make sure the plane has the right amount of
gas.
And
the
tires have enough air.
But they brought 26 troops back, and it took 40 hours of that whole. Wow. But in any event, it was. I met the president of Philippine Airlines, and said a few words because Nielson Airport was instrumental.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was.
It's very cool.
And then. I was rather hoping he'd give me a lifetime pass on their airlines, but
no,
I just
want
got
you to pay your fare.
I just got a breakfast out of
it. That's all right. It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
So Nielson, let me ask you a question. Go back to where the tanks are lining up and they overtake the barricade and knock it down, and that nice gentleman that was from the South said, "Move your ass out of the way."
Yeah. Well,
you said you were going to come back to something about that. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because you mentioned it. Now I want to know about it.
Well, in I think 2014, my oldest son and I went back to the MacArthur Foundation in Norfolk, Virginia, And in fact, my wife and I are going back there in October for another one of these reunions at the MacArthur Foundation. And in that they had panels of people who talked. And there's one panel, there's this little old guy, he was late 80s or early 90s. And he said, "Hi, my name is George Fisher. I was a crewman on the Georgia Peach."
Wow.
I said, "What are the odds? There are 8 million men in Europe, 8 million in the Pacific."
Yeah.
And to have somebody who at that same instant be there and still be alive,
yeah.
60 years later, whatever it was.
Did you get a chance to
talk
to him?
Oh, more than that. I had to tell him the story about. He said, "Oh, that was our tank commander, Lieutenant Herndon." Mm-hmm. He said nobody could understand what he said. He had such a strong accent.
So he knew exactly who you were talking about.
Absolutely. He said nobody could understand the guy. I asked him if he was still alive. He said no, he's not.
Wow.
But so I befriended Mr. Fisher.
Was Mr. Fisher there at the same time also with the command?
He was in the tank.
He was in the tank.
Yeah, he was the gunner.
Okay.
I asked him, I said, "George, how did you end up in a tank in Manila?" He said, "Lindsay, I'm still trying to figure that out." He says, "I played the trombone in a military band.
Wow.
And next you know, I was down in New Guinea learning to shoot tanks.
Wow.
And then I was ended up in Manila." I said, "Well, George, I'm very happy you ended up in Manila." But he was a kindly little old guy. He died. He was almost 100 when he died. But he lived in a little town in Maryland. And I wanted to make sure the town understood they had what I consider a hero in that town. And so I made a pest of myself to the local newspaper until they finally said, "Okay, we're going to send a reporter out, interview him." And so they wrote a really nice piece about him.
That's nice.
And then the local Lions Club decided that they're going to have a George Fisher Day.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, it was great.
I mean, it's very important that we remember and elevate people that put their lives at risk to give us the liberties that we have now.
Well,
a lot of people take them for granted, but it's living free in an environment where you're safe is not an easy thing to achieve.
Well, I wrote a piece. I'm a lawyer here in Ventura County, mm-hmm. and we have a monthly Slick magazine. I wrote a piece about my experiences there. And I remember concluding it saying that, our country should never forget what we stand for. We don't fight to conquer land. We fight to liberate land.
Absolutely.
Number one. Number two, people from all across this country, farmlands in Iowa or Montana, entered that war to go to places they couldn't pronounce, right, to liberate people they didn't even know, people like my family. And I said, "Man, you better never slight the military." It used to really irritate me in Vietnam, the people that would slander the troops. Yeah. They're doing their job.
Yeah, and a lot of times, they it's like you beat up the messenger. The troops, they're just doing their job.
Right.
They're there to be troops, right? And so sometimes our leaders, they screw up and they do the wrong thing, but our troops should never be
victimized,
talked down to or victimized.
Right.
I mean, they're all, like you said, they're all heroes.
Well,
you dedicate your life to that cause. You need to be upheld.
Well, they gave up the security of their life to fight for a cause they believe in.
Absolutely.
And I'm just not sure about America today. I think if push came to shove, that's fine, but we've become, I don't know, blasé. I don't know. We've stood for so much, and I'm not sure how dedicated we are to those.
I think we're going through a lull right now, a downtime of people not appreciating the sacrifices of the people behind us, and I think we need to, elevate those types of heroes that we had behind, and not forget. And hopefully not end up back there again where we're having to do the same thing all over again. Because that's not a good place to be. So, Lindsay, let me ask you another question. When you were 18 years old, right out of high school, first of all, do you remember your high school life? Were you into sports? What were you into?
Well, I was not into much. I was just doing things. Actually,
What were you into school?
Oh yes, of course. And actually, I skipped a grade, so I was in college at 16.
Oh wow!
And so but yeah, I love the teachers and yeah.
You love the education.
Oh yeah. And in fact, I became very good friends with my Latin teacher in high school, and she was, she made you think, and she was a great teacher. I mean, I was kind of a smart-ass kid, and so one time we had to write a 3-page paper all in Latin, in a blue book. You sweat blood, right? And as a smart-ass kid, I wrote on the cover, her name was Cote, Letha Cote. I wrote in my best Latin, Cote is mente captus, which I thought meant crazy. She put a red line through it. She says, "That's wrong, Lindsay. Here's how you say it." And she writes it in line. I never forgot that. But for 35 years after I graduated, more than that, I befriended her. She lived in Palm Springs. She never married. And so every time I was down there, I made sure that I took her to breakfast or dinner.
Just the appreciation.
Yeah.
For inspiring
you. She was a wonderful person. I mean, each summer she would go to a different university around the world. I mean, from Japan to Russia, and study in the summer. She went to 28 different universities. And I remember she had a little mobile home in the desert. She smuggled in a pine cone from Sparta in Greece, and it grew into this huge pine tree. Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
She had a Greek tree in her yard.
Yeah.
That's so
but
awesome.
she never drove, so we always had to pick her up because she didn't drive. But very inspiring woman, and was just a marvelous soul.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm glad you met her, and I'm glad she touched your life to the point where she motivated you to become something better.
Well, I had this ongoing 30 or 40 year joke with her. I mean, I got a B in Latin too, and I usually was up there in A's. And I just gave her a lot of trouble over the years. I said, Letha. I got her well enough that I could call her by her first name. I knew her. I said, the fact that you gave me a B kept me out of Harvard. You realize that? You said, yeah, right. So anyway, at our 50th class reunion, 50th, we had 5 teachers show up from our high school. I mean, that's amazing to me. She was one of them. Wow. And she gave this talk, and she said, I was going through some old boxes the other day, and she says, I ran across an extra credit paper that Lindsay did, and I didn't give him credit for it. So she went to the high school, she reduplicated my whole report card, and suddenly my B became an A-.
Well, that's better.
Yeah. So she handed it to me, and I said, thank you, Letha, that it comes a little late, kept me out of Harvard, as I told you. But I said, that's the problem with education today. You're giving people grades they don't deserve. She says, I can't win. I just can't win.
Yeah.
But
that is funny.
She,
That is so awesome. So what got you motivated to go into law? Is there a certain thing that happened in your life where you said, I need to...
Well, I went to UCLA, and I was the business manager for the Daily Bruin. It's a 30,000-day publication. I mean...
Oh, it's a newspaper.
Newspaper.
For UCLA.
UCLA. And I was the advertising manager. And in 1962, or 61, I guess, I was the highest paid student they ever had at UCLA because I was the advertising manager. I got commissions for all the ads, national ads, the cigarettes could advertise in those days and all this stuff. So I had a number of job offers after because I knew all the businessmen in Westwood and all that other stuff. But I went to work for UCLA. They wanted to hire me to be trained to be their publications manager for the Associated Students.
And when you went into UCLA, what was your mindset as to what you were going to learn? Did you sounds like you wanted to learn marketing?
Well, I was an English major with marketing minor, right? What I wanted to be is a geologist, but then I ran into Chem 101.
Too many numbers.
I never, the only thing I remember about chemistry is when the professor, he had these 400 people lecture halls, and he had a little cannon filled with hydrogen.
Uh-huh.
And he had a cork in it, and he put a spark on it and it exploded to shoot the cork to the back.
Oh my goodness.
That's what I remember about chemistry.
That was
hydrogen explodes.
That was the fun part.
Yeah, but so anyway, my college roommate worked for a savings and loan in Culver City, and I was disappointed at working at UCLA because I was just starting, and we'd go to the student union, have a cup of coffee, and the conversation would be like, gee, do you realize there's 168 years of service to UCLA sitting around this table? I'd been there for 2 weeks. I thought, oh my God. But the one that scared me, one of the guys said, well, in 7 years, 3 months, and 11 days, I'm going to retire.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy's counting down the days and years.
That's not a good
I said, I got to get out of here. This is not a healthy environment. So my college roommate had worked for a savings and loan, and he said, hey, we're looking for an appraiser. Well, I couldn't even spell appraiser, but I said, anything's better than this. And it was closer to where I was living in Culver City.
Yeah.
So I went there, and then my roommate moved to Ventura. He went to work for a fellow named Don Woolsey that his family owned a lot of property. And so one day, when Mr. Woolsey's father died, they hired a fellow named Walter Hoffman to appraise the estate for estate taxes. And Mr. Hoffman asked my roommate, he said, I'm looking for somebody young like you. Do you have anybody? Well, every time we drove up to visit Ventura in those days, it was just, we couldn't believe how nice it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was beautiful. So I was doing my military 2-week training, and up in Utah, and Dick said, hey, you ought to contact this guy. He's looking for an appraiser, because I was working as an appraiser with the savings and loan. So long and short of it is I came up and interviewed with him, and they had a land management firm, and they were looking for somebody to take over the appraisal aspect of it. Mm-hmm. They managed 45,000 acres here in the county. I mean, essentially, Thousand Oaks was the Jantz Ranch before it was Thousand Oaks. We managed that. We managed the Camarillo Ranch before it was the city of Camarillo. I mean, we managed a lot of properties.
So if there was a developer that wanted to make some homes or businesses, they went to the bank to get the loan.
And they needed
you to go out there and make sure that something it was going to happen.
But I primarily got involved in eminent domain. I got here in '65. The county was beginning to urbanize. We're a rural county. But, putting in streets and schools and parks. And so the appraisal, I began to specialize in eminent domain, governmental needs. So I worked for every city here, the county, the governments.
So was your job to go to make sure that the people that were developing the land actually had ownership of the land?
Well, that would be part of it, title work. But the issues of valuation, there's some very complex issues. But I began to testify as an expert
Oh, okay.
Either for the county or whomever was condemning or the landowner. And in one case, I call it the seminal case, the county had cut down a row of windbreaks on Rice Road, and because they were putting in a canal, they had to cut it. And it was protecting the lemon orchard right next to it.
You're saying Rice Road in Oxnard?
In Oxnard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I said, farmers don't waste money. I'd learned that. If you go to every farm, you see all the equipment sitting there. They're not going to throw anything away. So I said, that windbreak is there for a reason. So I said, you cut it down, you've done something to the orchard that it's protecting. I mean, the wind's going to blow and you're going to lose blossoms. There's thorns on lemon trees. They're going to scar the fruit. When your wife goes to the market, she wants a pretty lemon. She doesn't want one with scars on it.
Right.
And so I figured, I came up with a theory that you have to replant the windbreak. It was there for a reason. It'll take 8 years. But in the 8 years that it has until it's matured, you're going to lose quality and you're going to lose quantity. And I capitalized that and said, okay, and that ended the present worth of all these losses. And I said, you're going to, in addition to taking the land, you've got to pay damages for what it's done to the orchard. Right. Well, the law didn't allow that in those days. But the Court of Appeal, the county appealed because they lost. And so the lawyer that I was working with, the landowner's lawyer, said, what do you think of this? So this doesn't make sense. I typed out and I gave it to him. Well, when he filed the answer to the appeal, it was my words with some law thrown in.
Wow.
And the Court of Appeal agreed with my theory and said, Mr. Nielson's theory is correct, and we're upholding it.
So, Lindsay, where did you get that idea to write all that stuff like that?
He just asked me to. It was,
you wanted to?
I knew my theory. I made it up, but I knew it. So I just said, here, this doesn't make sense because of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But in that lawsuit, in the courtroom, it's fascinating because the county's lawyer and the landowner's lawyer both became judges.
Okay.
The judge became an appellate court justice, and I, the witness, became a lawyer. Wow. We all went whoop, just like that. So I call it the seminal case because that got me interested. And I thought, well, hell, I can do that. So the timing was perfect because I had 4 children, and the idea of having to drive to Los Angeles every night, the public defender and some other lawyers formed a law school here in Ventura. And they took over the old St. Catherine's Academy, and it was 5 minutes from where I work because I had the appraisal business, which is kind of interesting because the appraisal business, the most interesting assignment I ever had, I worked for the U.S. government for Vandenberg Air Force Base. Vandenberg is the only place in continental United States because California goes from north-south to east-west at Point Conception. So Vandenberg, if you launch into a polar launch, you don't cross over land. If you do it from Cape Canaveral, you go over Cuba. Here we don't do that. So at a polar launch, remember the Earth is spinning below you, you're going around from pole to pole. So you make 3 revolutions, you've covered the whole Earth.
Right.
3 revolutions, you photograph the entire Earth. Very strategic.
Yeah.
But the engineer said there, if we have to blow up a rocket in the first 2 minutes, with the prevailing winds, where's it going to fall? Well, it's going to fall on the Bixby Ranch, which was right next to Vandenberg. 6-8 miles of coastline, 25,000 acres. And so the Corps of Engineers hired me. I'm not sure how that happened. but they hired me to appraise this strip of land 2,500 feet along the coast. And, so it was a huge assignment. Yeah. And in that, I learned why our government will never balance its books, because I knew it was going to be a year-long assignment. I'm going to have to look at ranch sales from Northern California all the way to San Diego. It was a huge assignment, bigger than anything I've ever done. Yeah. And so whenever I worked for the county or the cities, I always gave them a not-to-exceed figure. No matter what we run into, you're not going to get billed more than that. So I figured I'll do that with the federal government. Well, the not-to-exceed figure I made sure I was on my tippy toes that I'd never reach that number. Yeah. And then I knew I was going to have to hire civil engineers.
So you give them the worst case scenario.
Yeah, worst case. And then the Corps of Engineers calls me and said, "Well, we're putting those two numbers together. That's your contract." Like, I said, as a vendor, I'm extremely happy. Yeah. As a taxpayer, you've done that 10,000 times today across America. He said, "Yes." Yeah. I said, we'll never get. I said, I'm not going to bill you that much. I know it.
80-90% of the people are taking advantage of that and just taking the money.
Oh, all these defense contractors, can you imagine? But anyway, I thought we'll never get this budget under control. So anyway, I did my first phase of the appraisal. I came out like $400 million or something, and we're flying over it. I had some congressional aide. He said, looking at it, a strip of fee land along the beach. And he says, $400 million. He says, that's not bad. That's only the cost of a couple of airplanes. I'm thinking it's the biggest land grab since the railroads. Yeah. And I said, man, you guys think differently back there. Yeah. So, I got to thinking, why do you have to own it in fee, absolute ownership? Buy the development rights. You don't care if a rocket falls on a cow. You just don't want it to fall on a human. Right. Well, the Bixby family, if you go down to Long Beach, Signal Hill is owned by the Bixbys, all those oil wells. So they hired the former Undersecretary of the Air Force as their consultant, right? Okay. And immediately they're going to be building a city there. Well, it's not going to happen in Santa Barbara County, but that was the theory. So I remember saying, why don't you just buy the development rights? So we were arguing. They never created an easement. I said, look, if you keep asking me these kinds of questions, you're playing in their ballpark. They ought to be playing in your ballpark, because you're going to create the easement.
Yeah, bring them to you.
Right. And, they said, Lindsay, can you come back to the Pentagon? Well, is the Pope Catholic? Of course I can. And so I went back there, and I remember some colonel or something met me, and it's like a rabbit hutch going in and all this other stuff. And so I remember coming into the office, and in there was the head of all Air Force facilities in the world, the head of the Department of Justice, eminent domain, the commander of Vandenberg Air Force Base, the head of the Corps of Engineers who acquires things. And I'm thinking, oh, man.
I'm in trouble.
They were testing to see what kind of a witness I would make if we went to trial. But I said, I don't. What are you talking about, $400 million? You can buy that. So they said, appraise it. I said, you got to give me the wording of the easement. What is it you're acquiring? So anyway, I appraised it for $18 million instead of $400. And Bixby's wanted, 24, and so the government paid them 20, and they accepted $20 million for that easement. Yeah. I thought, I just saved the government $380 million. I didn't get a gold star. I didn't get an attaboy. Nothing. I mean, it was just, okay.
Just a spit in the bucket.
Yeah. I thought, oh, my Lord.
Yeah, the accountability in the government is really bad. There is none. There's no accountability.
No, there is none. There's just none.
And I really don't know how can you fix that. I don't know how you fix it. It's so...
Well, in any event, going back to the story.
Yeah.
So I went to law school, and since I was so involved in real estate, that's what I wanted to do, real estate law. And
did your appraisal company pay for that schooling?
See, I think I'm past the statute of limitations. Yes. Yeah. It was a perk. Of course, I was the only shareholder, and I was the president of the company.
There you go.
But I remember one time I was audited, actually. And I had all these educational expenses. The guy says, "You have quite a bit of education." I said, "Yes." "Could you get me a transcript?" I said, "Yes, I can." He says, "Okay, you don't have to. I just want to know if I could." It came back. Yeah, no change.
Good deal.
But
how many years did you go to school for?
Night law school, 4 years.
School. What school did you go to?
Well, it's here in Ventura. It was called Ventura College of Law in those days. Now they have one in Santa Barbara, so it's the Colleges of Law. It's 55 years old now. And, it's distinguished itself.
Is it still around?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Wow.
In fact, the end of October, my wife and I are going to go to their 55th
nice.
thing. I'm one of the second or third classes.
So it was brand new when you went there.
Absolutely. And but we've got about 12 judges. We have the district attorney of Santa Barbara. I mean, our graduates. So
you're alumni.
Yeah. I taught there with my son one time.
Cool.
Well, I taught, and then one summer we jointly taught, and that was fun.
Do you remember where you took your bar exam?
Where or when?
Where?
Los Angeles.
You had to go to L.A.?
Yeah, and it was at the L.A. Convention Center.
Mm-hmm. They just get all the people that ready to take the exam.
It's 3 days. It's grueling.
It's a 3-day grueling thing.
And they always tell you, don't ask anybody how they answered a question, because they'll think of things you didn't think of.
Yeah.
So you just, it's grueling. There's nothing left in the tank when you get done with the damn thing.
Did you pass it on your first attempt?
Yeah. Oh,
Very
yeah.
nice.
Yeah. But for years I had both businesses. I had the forensic real estate business, and as well as the law. But then, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, a lawyer called me up and said, "Lindsay, would you be a receiver?" I don't know what the hell a receiver. What do you do? Well, you work for the judge, and usually it's to sell something or something. He said, "Don't worry, I'll help you. I'll do all your pleadings and stuff." Well,
I never heard of that position, receiver.
Well, it's fabulous. I mean, and it's because, I mean, I know my wife would love me to retire, but you never get bored. From week to week, I have no idea what I'm going to be working on. I mean, I literally mean that.
Explain to me one thing that a receiver does.
Well,
I know it's different.
Right.
You told me it's different, but name one example.
Well, first of all, you're working for the judge. Okay. Whatever the judge wants you to do. Usually it's going to be selling a property. It's going to be, in divorces, somebody, you have to sell the house. So I will sell the house. I become the seller. And
does the judge give you custody to deal with it? Is that what it does?
Yes, he orders that I sell it. The two fighting parties lose all control. They can't veto anything. I'll, probably because of my background as an appraiser, etc. I'm ideally set for that. And
so can we say it's kind of like an executor, where you execute the judge's ruling?
Right.
And so he takes away control of the property.
Right. They lose their veto power, and now we can move the case forward.
Okay, and then you deal with the listing, with
I hire a broker,
all the different people, and make sure that everybody's doing what they need to.
And when I put a contract together, I go to the judge, and if somebody wants to complain, you can complain, but I will say I've done this over 500 times, and not once has the judge overruled my decision.
Well, you're the expert.
Right. And I've also run companies while it's in litigation. I mean, I've run a hotel. Wow. I've run a grocery store.
You become the CEO for that?
I ran a manufacturing company. And during COVID, I had to lay off 18 people. I didn't like that. But, you have to do what you have to do. And so I've sold an America's Cup boat. I don't know what and
it's like a new adventure every case.
Oh, I mean, I ran a medical billing company, I mean, I didn't know the codes and all that other stuff, but there was hanky-panky going on. And so it's fascinating. I brought in another lawyer to assist me now because it's getting to be a little harder. But I've said I don't know why every judge doesn't have a receiver on his speed dial.
Yeah.
You can have cantankerous people.
So
get it off my desk. Give it to Mikey.
So this is not a thing that every judge has?
He has access to it if he wants, but I don't think a lot of judges know about it.
Wow.
But it is.
But to you, sounds like a really good
well,
place to be.
I've been doing it for 30 or 40 years, but about every 3 weeks I'll have a younger lawyer say, "Gee, how do you get into this?" And I said, "Well, I don't think there's any." In law school, I said that the instructor probably spent 10 minutes saying that there's this remedy called receiver.
Yeah.
That's it. So there's no training that you get. It's your judgment.
Well, how can you train when it's something new every time?
You can't. And that's what I like about it.
Yeah, you're constantly you're working your brain to figure out a new problem.
And the other aspect is that, I've been sued a couple of times, but in order to sue, they have to get the judge's permission.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if I were committing a crime, stealing from a business, there's no question. But if I'm doing what the judge told me to, good luck on that one, because the judges always have your back.
Yeah.
And so it is, I've been threatened. Some guy wanted to cold cock me one time. I said, don't let these invisible black robes get in the way because you hit me, you're hitting the judge.
That's not a good thing.
And well, I mean, it has some awesome powers that I've learned.
Yeah.
At Harbor and Fifth, there was a huge subdivision that ground to a halt because there was environmental stuff. Mm-hmm. There's a thing called a receiver certificate lien. I can go I borrowed $1 million on that. Now, Bank of America and Wells Fargo has had loans against it. The receiver's lien goes right to the top of the class.
Yeah.
I mean, that's unheard of. It's
it's probably superpowers that the court needs to make things happen.
To make things
happen. And to fast track something because he doesn't need to wait for permission or anything like that. He just knows this is what the ruling is that's going to happen.
Yeah. So it gets things done.
Yeah. Well, Lindsay, one of the things that I love about the work that I do with my company that I own is I like doing the work because it's mechanical and you enjoy it. But the biggest thing that I love is meeting new people. And you were one of those examples. I really appreciate you having the time to come over here and talk to me about it. I hope if you want something more to say down the road, you have an open invitation to come in and talk about whatever you want.
Well, I think this is how I discovered my natural family is worth a program too. Yeah. So sometime in the future we'll do
you want to talk about it now? Do you have the energy to do it?
Well, I don't know. What is it?
It's according to that broken clock. It's 6:35.
Let me check my better half here. Yeah, maybe we'll do it another time.
We'll do it another time?
Yeah.
Well, today was an interesting conversation. I'm really glad you made the time to do it. And hopefully down the road, it could be in the next couple of days, next week, a month from now, whenever you decide.
I've got your number, Alex.
You got my number. So thank you so much for coming over, and I really appreciate you.
You bet. Thank you.
You're welcome.